Let me try that again. I'm not muted anymore. Welcome everyone to the final day of the specific Aims Accelerator. So let's let everybody get settled in. As usual, please let me know in the chat that you can hear me okay. And if you do have any questions about any of the homework that you've had this week, you can type those in the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end of today's session. But yeah, we are on the very last day. So the first thing I'd love to hear from you in the chat is, what have you found most useful during this accelerator? What are you going to take away from this experience? Let me know in the chat, and I will pull up my slides in the meantime so that we can get started. Myra says, breaking things down into small, doable tasks. Yeah, absolutely. That part is hugely, hugely important. Because I remember, I think it was probably on day one that someone mentioned that they get stuck before they even start, because it just seems like they don't even know where to begin, and so that kind of stops them in their tracks right away. The antidote to that is to break things down into smaller pieces, right? So that you're actually able to get some traction and recognize that you just need to kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other, right? So absolutely breaking things down into smaller, doable tasks. That is another reason why we have broken things up into small pieces over the course of 5 days, right? Is to keep you focused, to keep your eyes on the prize, and to sort of put blinders on a little bit, right? So, today we're working on this, tomorrow we're working on this part, the next day we're working on the next part, right? It's to help maintain focus. The one thing I've learned over the years truly is that mastery of anything comes through focus and sort of commitment or continuity, right? It's consistency. It's doing the thing over and over again and staying focused on that. That's what helps you develop mastery in grant writing or virtually anything else, right? Kim says, structure and strategy can help break down the Aims page and make it less scary. Yes, absolutely, right? I am truly a strategist at heart, and I will tell you that is one of the keys that unlocks a fundable grant, right? Is having a clear strategy, both in terms of communicating the value of the research that you're proposing, but also the strategy in terms of like how you're actually going to write the thing, strategy in terms of, having a clear plan and breaking that down as well, right? Brian says the idea of placing our work in the conversation and bringing the reviewer to the conversation. Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad that that's one of the pieces that you're taking away. I know I mentioned this when I talked about it on day one, but that nugget from a mentor years and years ago really shifted my perspective on the literature more broadly and what we're really doing here. And honestly, for me, I know I mentioned this before, but it really helped remove some of the sort of antagonism from the peer review process. It helped me recognize that at its best, it really is a conversation among peers, and we're all trying to, support each other to do better work, and to get excited about discovery, right? Of course, it doesn't always work that way. That is the ideal and not often the reality, but even just having that perspective going into a situation where you're putting your work up in front of your peers for review, it helps to think about it in terms of a conversation rather than a reason to be protective or defensive about the work that you're doing. Absolutely. Any other takeaways from participants this week? It's really helpful for me to know this. So this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. I personally have had a great time. I've really loved sharing this and going through this process with you. And I want to know if we should do it again. So do let me know. But I personally have really enjoyed this. And I've, breaking things up over the course of the week and really trying to keep you focused and help you get that momentum has I found it great. I don't know what you guys think at all. Myra says she loved it. I'm really glad to hear that. Great. Let me pull up my final set of slides for day 5. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Yes, no? Yes, okay. So I'm going to go full screen on this. Okay, here we are, day 5. So you've written all the components of your Aims page, or at least you know what they are. You may not have gotten all the way through your homework yet, but you know what the components are of a strong and persuasive Aims page. You know what order I recommend that you put them in, and you know why I'm recommending that you put them in that order, right? So now what? Now what do you do? So today you're going to learn the steps that you need to take to test your conceptual foundation and prepare for writing a more competitive full application. You're going to learn where to get feedback on your specific aims, and you're going to learn how to use your Aims page to make sure your application finds the right home for funding. So this is where we do start getting into a little bit more of the advanced strategy piece. So yeah, that's what we are covering today. But before we get into that, I just wanted to address a few questions about the grant funding formula course. So when does it start? Well, it starts immediately. As soon as you register, you get full access to all the modules, all the lessons, all the, the pivot bonus, it's also in there. So it starts right away. However, we have built in a weekly guidance system for you that comes over email. And we do that over 16 weeks, kind of like we've been doing this week, to help break things up into smaller pieces, to help support you to keep moving through at a good pace, but to make sure that you're not overwhelmed by getting everything all at once. We've developed this 16-week guidance system to help you through. What we have done is press pause on starting to deliver that to you until January 3rd, because we recognize that, we're in December now, things are starting to wind down for the holiday season, and you might not want to get started right away. So what we have done is we've pressed pause on that 16-week guidance system. You will start getting those emails on January 3rd. If you want to start before then, like I said, it's all there for you. You can just go in and start following the lessons module by module. Start at, module 1 and work your way through. It's all there in order for you. But if you would like that, if you would like to sort of follow the guidance that we provide through the weekly emails, that will start on January 3rd. Okay. How much time will it take every week? So there are sort of 2 answers to this question. One is the sort of direct answer, which is we've created these lessons, as you've probably noticed this week. They're deliberately short, right? They're deliberately short because we want you to actually implement and take action. So each lesson should be under 15 minutes, meaning that you can spend about an hour per week watching the videos and doing the worksheets and workbooks to help you move forward in your grant. And that should be sufficient to get you through the material. How long it actually takes you to write your grant that's something that we can't predict. But what I will say is that all of the lessons and the worksheets are designed to support you in that writing. We're not asking you to do anything that you don't already have to do to write a strong application. We're not asking you to do any sort of useless or frivolous assignments or activities. So all of the work that you're doing is going to support you in writing an application more efficiently. Okay, so you also want to consider how much time you're actually going to need to do that. And I will say, one of the things that we teach in the planning module, module 2, is all about how to start to get a better sense of how long things take, right? Because a lot of us think like, oh, it just takes as long as it takes. But actually, what you can do is start to constrain the amount of time you have for an activity, a piece of writing that you're doing, and just give yourself that amount of time and tell yourself, like, that's the amount of time that it's going to take me. And then at the end of that session, you can assess whether that is enough for you or whether you do need to go back to it, right? So we're trying to sort of shift the way that you think about how you spend your time. And the last thing I'll say about the time piece is that one way or another, you're going to spend time writing one of these grants, right? Whether you decide to drop everything else and binge write your grant in the last few weeks before the submission deadline, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing that. And everything else is going to fall by the wayside. Or you can give yourself a much longer runway and give yourself a much more realistic and sustainable timeline to write a grant where you can do it and maintain all of the other things that you have on your plate and not totally burn yourself out. So one way or another, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing this. It's whether you want to do it the hard way or the easy way. Okay. Are the lessons asynchronous or synchronous? They are all asynchronous. Like I said, once you register, they are all there for you. They are video lessons. They are all available for you immediately. If you have any questions about the material that you're learning, you don't have to wait for an office hour session. You can write your question in the comment box underneath the lesson, and you will get a response from me or one of the other editors on my team, usually within 24 hours. Okay, so it's all asynchronous because we know that everybody's schedule is different. And we want to be able to make this available to you as simply and easily as possible, and on a schedule that works for you. So it's available to you whenever you need it, immediately once you register. Okay. When will I know if I got the Aims bonus? So anybody who has registered up until this point has the Aims bonus. We will be reaching out to you to let you know what comes next for you. So stay tuned for that. That will not be coming this week. That will be coming next week. There are still a few spots available. So if you've been umming and ahhing about whether to join, there are still a few spots available for the Aims bonus, but do not wait too long because they will go quickly. And the last question is there a K-Award version? Yes, there is. Just email me, just reply to any one of the emails that you've gotten from me, and we will send you the syllabus and a registration link. We don't have a fancy registration page like we do for the R-Series course, but we have the information that you need to see what the syllabus looks like and what you can do to sign up. So if there are any other questions about that, you can put them in the Q&A box. I'm happy to answer those at the end of the session today. Let us continue with day 5. So I just want to kind of walk you through sort of the order of operations when we are using the Aims page in the way that we have been using it this week. Okay, so step number 1 is to write a draft of your Aims page. That's what we've been working on up until this point, right? So days 1 to 4, we wrote a draft of your Aims page, or that was the goal of what we were doing on days 1 to 4. Now, what you can do, now that you have a draft of your Aims page, we're going to go through the rest of the steps. So you want to get feedback from colleagues. You want to get feedback from a potential program officer. You want to use that feedback to refine your idea. And then you want to use your draft Aims page as the blueprint for writing the rest of your R01 or whatever R-Series or K-Award grant you're writing. Okay. So step number 1 is to draft your specific Aims page. Of course, we've already talked all about this. So the only thing I will say here is that the purpose of this iteration of your Aims page is to get feedback on your idea, the conceptual foundation of what you're doing. Do not get stuck perfecting this, okay? Do not get stuck here. You'll refine everything later. This is not the final version of your Aims page, okay? This is the conceptual blueprint. And you do, if you get stuck here, you're never going to move forward, right? This is for feedback specifically. Okay. Step number 2 is to get feedback from co-investigators, colleagues, and mentors. Okay. So again, we talked about this back on day 1. Getting early feedback on the high-level concept of your research idea is the most efficient way to proceed. Your goal at this stage is to establish confidence that A, there's a solid argument for the significance and impact of this research, and B, your general approach to filling the gap in knowledge is sound, right? That's what you're trying to figure out by getting feedback from colleagues and mentors, et cetera, right? So getting feedback from co-investigators, mentors, colleagues, your program officer, and your research support office, if you have that sort of infrastructure available to you, those are all options for you. I would pick at least 2 of these just to make sure that you have sufficient feedback at this stage. Okay, so some words of wisdom here. Ask your co-investigators and colleagues that you trust to review your Aims page from a conceptual perspective. In other words, ask for specific feedback about your idea. Explain that this is a draft and you're looking for feedback on the significance, the objectives, the aims. Because if you don't give them guidance on what to comment on, you may not get the feedback you're looking for. And I am giving you these words of wisdom based on my own experience, right? So if you just, and I have done this so many times until I learn better, if you just send something out and say, hey, can you take a look at this? You have no idea what sort of feedback people are going to return to you, right? They could give you comments and feedback on grammar. And at this point, who cares about the grammar on your Aims page? That's not what you're after. So you want to ask specific questions to get specific feedback from these people that you're reaching out to, okay? And remember also what I said earlier this week about colleagues you trust. And it's specifically colleagues you trust with that sort of baby seedling of a research idea, right? Some people are not well suited to nurture early iterations of ideas. They will stomp all over it and kill your baby seedling of an idea. You want to make sure that you are reaching out to people who can give you honest feedback about how to refine what it is that you're doing without completely discouraging you, okay? That is what you're after. So again, I'm going to repeat this. Be selective about who gets access to early drafts of your work. It is rare. And so here's another reason. It's rare, but not unheard of, that someone will take your idea and run with it, right? That also happens. But what is far more common is to get feedback that discourages you from even continuing. This happens because people don't treat early idea development as delicately as they should. Bottom line, seek out people that you trust will take care of your early ideas by nurturing and encouraging them rather than crapping all over them or co-opting them, right? Remember that if you think something is cool and exciting and important, that is not an accident. Trust that you're onto something and don't be discouraged by negative feedback. There is a difference between concept and execution. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, but really this is important. Okay, let's talk about getting feedback from your NIH program officer. So I'm assuming this is a refresher for most of you, but let's talk about it anyway. NIH institutes and centers have their own funding priorities. So you need to be sure that your idea is a good fit for your target institute or center's mission and goals and priorities, okay? So each institute or center has program officers who are responsible for fulfilling program objectives and maintaining a funding portfolio. You figure out the right fit in terms of where your project best fits by reaching out to one or several program officers to see whether your idea is of interest. And I go through this in depth in module 1 of the grant funding formula, how you go about doing that, how you figure out who to reach out to, what your different options are, all of that. That is a huge part of the strategy that we discuss in module 1 of the grant funding formula. Okay, now let's talk about refining your idea. So you want to refine your idea based on the feedback you got and based on your own assessment after some time away from your Aims page, okay? Some words of wisdom here. Remember that feedback is just information that you use to make the best decision, okay? You don't have to implement all the feedback you get. In fact, the feedback that you get is often contradictory. So hands raised if you've ever sent something out for feedback to multiple people and you've gotten responses and they contradict each other. Is that something that happens to you? Yeah, okay. So you've probably been torn in multiple directions, right? You've like, who am I supposed to listen to here? Do I listen to this person because they're more senior? Or do I listen to this person because I think they know more specifically about what I'm trying to accomplish, right? Like you always feel a little bit torn. But what I want you to remember is that you are the boss. You are the decider, right? So you need to make sure that you are recognizing that people are assessing your work from their perspective and expertise, and you need to just use that as evidence, as information. That is, they are not deciding for you. You are gathering information and deciding based on your own expertise and experience, right? Again, your job is to gather information, in other words, feedback, and analyze that information in the context of your own expertise to make a decision that best serves your research goals, right? And that's not just in the context of conflicting feedback. That is always. You get to ask yourself if you agree or disagree with the feedback that you're getting. And either way, it's going to give you really useful information. Okay. Again, this is something we talk about in module 4 of the grant funding formula. It's a whole module on how to get feedback, how to handle feedback, how to use feedback. All right. Number 5, use your Aims page as the blueprint for your full proposal. So you now have the 30,000-foot view of your project. Remember that your goal was to establish confidence that there's a solid argument for the significance and impact of this research, and that your general approach to filling the gap in knowledge is sound. If you feel confident that you're on the right track, that's great. You can use your Aims page as your guide while you write your full application. So that blueprint that you have created becomes the source of the different components of your grant. Okay? Some words of wisdom here. If you don't feel confident that you're on the right track, that is okay. The reason that this process is so efficient is because it allows you to go back to the drawing board before you've invested a ton of time and effort on an idea that wasn't on the right track. I know, and this has happened so many times to students in the grant funding formula. They've said, like, I realized when I sent this around that something was off, and I kind of had to go back to the drawing board. And although it might seem like it's a big loss or a setback, it's actually a win. It might not feel like a win, but ultimately going back to the drawing board at this stage is a victory, because you have saved yourself a ton of time and effort and energy, because you're still at the blueprint level. You're not having to destroy half of a building that you've built. Remember that analogy from day one. It's like an architecture that you are creating. That's the blueprint piece versus, building the building. You are solidifying that blueprint before you go and build the building. And that is so much more efficient than just like throwing something together and then having to destroy it and start all over, right? Okay. So your homework for this very last day of the specific Aims Accelerator is to reach out to at least 2 colleagues to ask if they'll review your Aims page. Once you feel confident that your idea is solid, you can then reach out to a program officer to see whether your idea is a good fit for your target institute or center. And then you can make a plan to write your full application. All right. That is the end of the lesson. Now it is time for questions about homework or anything else. And I see that there was one question, so I'm going to open that here. Oh, I think this was just a comment about the timing of the Aims Accelerator lessons that we're doing. Yeah, so the comment here is, I think that if the schedule could be changed to somewhere earlier in the day, that would be helpful. I do understand. So again, like, everybody's on different schedules, right? We can't please everyone. And so that's why we have, for this week, we had these live lessons for people who are able to show up, but we also have the recordings available in the course area. We also have the private podcast so that people can listen instead of sit in front of their computer and watch. We try to create as many ways for people to access this material as possible, because we know, like, we've got people joining from all over the country, and it's hard to accommodate everybody's schedule. So what we always try to do is find ways to make the material accessible in as many different ways as possible. That's really all we can do. And it's unfortunate if it doesn't work for you personally, but it's never going to work for everyone. And it's better, I think, to just do it and find the ways that work for you rather than not doing it at all because we can't accommodate everybody's schedules. Meyer says, I was working on homework related to goals and objectives. For training level grants, do we identify the training plan as part of the objective in addition to the research? So interestingly, on an Aims page for a training grant, and I'm talking specifically about career development awards. I'll admit that I'm not as familiar with sort of earlier training grants, but for K awards, you do not talk about training goals in the Aims page. That is entirely focused on the science. You do talk about career goals and objectives and training goals in the abstract, but not on the Aims page. So that is kind of an interesting and weird tidbit, but that is actually something that you can find in the guidelines. When you are reading about what goes where, when you're reading the guidelines to prepare a career development award, they will tell you that in the guidelines that you're not to include any information about career goals and objectives in the Aims page, but that you are required to mention those in the abstract. I don't know why that is, but that's why. That's what they do. Yeah. Any other questions? Brian asks, what specific characteristics have you identified in mentors, colleagues that make them better suited for feedback? We have lots of colleagues who are friendly, but maybe we've never been in a situation to see how they handle seedling ideas. That is a really excellent question. And I'll be honest, Brian, I'm not totally sure how to answer that. Like, for me, I think it has a lot to do with sort of instinct or intuition, which I know is like, that might be tricky if that's not something you're accustomed to using as a decision-making tool. I would say part of it is probably also reputation. So if you've heard anything about individual colleagues or mentors and how they've handled work from other folks, I think that would be something else to consider. But I think a way to look at this more generally, and this might be a bit controversial, but I think anybody who tells you that an idea is not fundable is probably someone you should not be listening to. Like I said, that might be a little bit controversial. And the reason that I say that is because, again, they're coming at this from their own perspective and their own experience and what they are interested in doing and where they've had success before, right? If you are trying to do something new and groundbreaking and exciting to you, I think there's a difference between an idea being fundable versus how you actually communicate the value of that idea. Obviously, as somebody who reviews grants for a living, I'm going to tell you that the way that you communicate the value of your idea can transform how it is perceived and received. And obviously, there's going to be a strategic component when you're speaking to a program officer about what is aligned with the funding institute's mission or priorities. But to say that a research idea in and of itself is not fundable, I think is just, it's not helpful, and it's probably not true. It might not be fundable at the moment at a particular from a particular sponsor, but that doesn't mean that the idea is no good or that you shouldn't pursue it. That's how I think about that. Any other questions? You're welcome, Kim. I'm glad you found it wonderful. I did too. I really enjoyed this week. Nancy asks, are there key questions to ask program officers? There are, and we cover those in module 1 of the grant funding formula. Amy says, thanks, Sarah and team. This was a great Aims week to jumpstart. Yes, I'm so glad. And again, this was the idea of this week, right? Was to give you that jumpstart and to give you that huge win under your belt before everything winds down for the holidays. And honestly, to kind of let your Aims page marinate a bit while you're, drinking eggnog or whatever, right? One of the things that we talk about inside the course is the importance of giving yourself time and space away from your grant so that you can come back to it with fresh eyes, because that's one of the ways that you as a PI can make huge improvements and refinements to your grant. And so this is a way to do that. You've gotten a draft of your Aims page. Awesome. You can just let it sit for a couple of weeks. And then when you come back to it, you'll see it in a completely different way. It will have been working its magic in your brain behind the scenes. And when you come back to it in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to say, oh my gosh, like I see what's missing here and I see what I need to add here. And I can do a much better iteration of this now that I've had a break from it. And that's also one of the reasons you want to give yourself a really long runway when you're writing one of these huge grants, is because if you're trying to cram it all into like 3 or 4 weeks, there's no chance you're going to get any time away from it. And so you're not going to be able to see those sort of, I don't want to say errors in judgment, but like assumptions that you are making that you need to make more explicit, right? It's really hard to see that stuff when you're just in it all the time. And it's also very unlikely that you're going to be able to get and implement useful feedback in a really short period of time before you submit your grant, right? So again, part of the objective for this week was to help you get that under your belt now and just chill for a couple of weeks and then like pick up where you left off in January so that you can really get moving and come back to your concept with fresh eyes. How much feedback is too much feedback? At what point do we decide the conceptual framework is solid? That is a really excellent question, and honestly, something that people struggle with a lot. How best to answer this? So like, I think at a certain point, you have to distinguish between your fear of judgment and criticism and your the sort of level of solidity of your idea, right? So what I see happen a lot is people go around and around and around on feedback because they are lacking the confidence that when they actually go up in the big leagues and get feedback from like a peer review committee, that it's all going to go fine. Or they go around and around and around on feedback because they have way too many voices in their ear. And they don't know who to trust or who to believe when it comes to feedback, right? That's what we were talking about earlier in terms of recognizing that the feedback that you get is all information, right? It's just information that you are using to make decisions to best serve your project, your grant. And so like, honestly, part of it is just deciding like, I've had enough feedback. I'm ready to act on that feedback and to move forward. Because in the end, like, you're still going to be getting feedback when you submit this grant to NIH for peer review, right? Like that is still feedback. And especially if you are writing a grant for the very first time, like if you're writing your very first R01 or even your first K award, setting the bar at getting funded is just like setting yourself up for disappointment. I mean, it's certainly possible that you can get your grant funded on the first go. We've had clients who have done that. Their very first R01, they get it funded. But it is much more reasonable to set the bar at getting really high quality feedback on your application the very first time that you submit it. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when people are writing their first grants, they underestimate how challenging it's actually going to be. And they end up like scrambling and throwing it together at the last minute, and it goes in and it's just not very good, right? It's just like, honestly, not very good. And it doesn't get discussed. But the real challenge with a grant not getting discussed is that the feedback that you're getting from the peer review process only really scratches the surface of what you need to do to get the grant into fundable shape. And the reason for that is because usually there are so many errors in grantsmanship when you're submitting something that's thrown together at the last minute. Like the grant is not clear, it's not well justified, it's disorganized, you're making a ton of assumptions. And reviewers are not trained to comment on grantsmanship, right? They're trained to comment on scientific merit. That's what they're there for. But if they can't even like figure out the scientific merit because your grant is so disorganized and poorly justified, you're not going to get very good feedback on the scientific merit of your application, right? So my recommendation always with your very first grant is to strive to submit a grant that is as free from grantsmanship errors as possible so that you can get really good feedback on the scientific merit. So that next time you know exactly what you need to do to refine your project so that it can get funded, right? And so that means that in that first instance, you are really focusing on writing something that is clear and simple and persuasive. And again, the goal is not to get your grant funded on the first shot, but like that would be an amazing byproduct, right? Like I said, it does happen that you write a grant that is so clear and persuasive and also has solid scientific merit that it gets funded on the first shot. But your goal should always be to submit that grant that is clear and persuasive and simple and well argued so that your reviewers can clearly see where you need to refine your project to enhance the scientific merit, right? So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer to a short question, but again, like at a certain point, you just have to decide that your grant is ready for prime time or that your Aims page is ready for prime time and you're ready to sort of build off of that to write your full application and then submit it to a peer review committee to get actual feedback on the scientific merit, right? Like ultimately, as PI, you just have to decide that. But I think if you are always going back to that question of, you know, do I agree with the feedback that I'm getting and have I collected enough information about the concept that I'm working with that I feel comfortable moving ahead? It's really about trusting yourself in that role of PI, and that is something that takes practice. So I'm just going to stop there because that was very long-winded, but I hope that helped. Thanks, Darlene. I'm glad you found it helpful. Shilpa asks, any advice if I'm applying what I learned here to my previous unfunded projects? So yes, I mean, absolutely, Shilpa. So, well, for one thing, so we, inside the grant funding formula, we have that whole module called Pivot on how to handle resubmissions, right? Like how to take the summary statement and use what you learned from that to write a really strong resubmission. But everything you learned over the course of this week you can just take what you learned this week and go back to your Aims page and look at it through the lens of what you've learned this week about how to structure the Aims page so that it is most persuasive and most clear, and refine your Aims page based on that, right? And of course, anything you learned from the peer critiques that you got previously. So absolutely, you can take what you learned this week and apply it to unfunded projects, 100%. Any other questions? Who actually has a draft of an Aims page now after only 5 days? I saw a few hands. Kim says, I do, it's messy. I mean, yeah, of course it's messy. That's kind of the point. Remember, just lower the bar on your expectations. Okay, it's fine. You're the only one right now who is looking at this, but what I want you to recognize is what you've just accomplished. In 4 days, you have a draft of an Aims page that you can now use and refine, right? Because you took it step by step, you stayed super focused, and you got it done. And that is a massive accomplishment. And yes, of course it's messy, but that's not the final version, right? I think like a lot of the reasons why we don't start is because we're afraid it's not going to be perfect the first time. But of course it's not going to be perfect the first time. So if we can just acknowledge that and not let that stop us, I mean, that's how you get things done. That's how you get unstuck, is just lowering the bar and acknowledging, like giving yourself permission for it to be terrible the first time you do it, right? But what you have done is like you've turned on the faucet. So anyway, I think that's a huge win. Myra says, I had my draft previously written, but doing the exercise has made it so much better. Yes, excellent. I'm glad. So for Shilpa, who just asked, like, this is what you can do, right? You can take your previous Aims page and go back and refine it based on what you learned, and it's going to be so much better. Any other reflections on what we've done this week? You're welcome, Kim. I'm glad you were here. Yeah. Myra wants to know, am I doing this again? Well, as I said earlier, this was an experiment. We've never done this before. I'll be honest that I may not do this again at this time of year because I know everybody is really winding down, and we're trying to wind down too. I do think it's well, and you tell me, I do think it's useful to really get that win under your belt and then take a little break. But I think if we did this again, we might do it maybe before the summer break, so that you can bring that momentum into writing a grant over the summer months. So let me know how that sounds. Yeah, maybe not in December again, but I personally found this experience to be really energizing for me. I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed it. So I would totally do it again. Probably not at this time of year. Myra says, it was so useful and I would love to tell my colleagues about it. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I will obviously let you know when we decide to do this again. And the best way to stay up to date on that is to just stay on our email list, and you'll hear about it. So great. Thanks, Nancy. I'm glad you could be here too. I'm glad you found it helpful. All right, everyone. Well, I won't keep you any longer so that you can go off and do your last little bit of homework. Have a fantastic weekend. I'm so glad that you were able to be here this week. And I will let you know when we do this next time. So thanks again, and happy holidays to everyone also.